So I got recommended this really cool video, Themes I Wish More Books Explored by Whit Calloway. It was really interesting as an aspiring writer to gain a bit of insight into what modern readers are looking for, and it's super inspiring to see a whole conversation now happening around this. It's one of those duh things I should have known already, talking about your personal opinions on YouTube, opinions that don't revolve around a pre-existing piece of media. You can do that? So like the Kool-Aid Man, I must burst through the wall and offer my 2 cents. Sit back, grab some popcorn, endure my awful gameplay, yes, I actually play games now, and enjoy the show.
I don't like your peaches, they are full of stones. I like bananas because they have no bones.
Writing from the perspective of an animal, or at least making talking animals your focal characters, is a vastly underexplored idea. Not only is it a wonderfully effective way to grow the reader's compassion towards the critters we as humans have been entrusted to protect, it's also just a wonderful vehicle for creativity. Most people probably write this one off as childish. They assume if your writing has talking animals, it's probably by default for kids, or at least YA. But I'm talking about exploring actual mature themes. Right from the perspective of a dog whose job it is to sniff out landmines during World War II, the dog doesn't have to talk. He can just be a neutral observer, offering a fly-on-the-wall perspective into the demining unit he's sent to accompany. He could experience love, bonding, visceral loss. You could give him a caustic sense of humor, or you could make him serious and earnest. The potential is as vast as your imagination. Right from the perspective of an abused cat, who's driven mad by the torment and plots to kill his owner, you could add some Edgar Allan Poe flair, where the cat grapples with guilt and hatred, and the story could writhe like his deteriorating mind. I wrote a story not entirely dissimilar to this. An abused cat leads an uprising of animals against humanity. It's not exactly Poe-inspired, though it is fairly gory. Not to mention, my first draft from years back is absolutely insane. I gave them guns. I gave the cats guns. What would that even look like? I called the first version The Beautiful Disasters, and yeah, the title about sums it up. Point is, now that I'm older, I still appreciate the general inventiveness of my younger self. Whether I had the chops for a seamless execution is inconsequential. The bones are there, and I can excavate and rework them anytime I like.
Don't give me tomatoes and sand ice cream cones. I like bananas because they have no bones.
Anyone familiar with the stuff I talk about may be surprised that Death Personified has yet to show up on this list. But no, I refuse to be that predictable, so I'm just gonna say personification in general. Personification is a great way to teach yourself a different perspective, and again, it's a wonderful tool for developing your compassion, as it oftentimes offers more dimension and nuance than writing from the perspective of a stock standard human being. To borrow an idea from one of my old virtual writing compatriots, write from the perspective of a cemetery. Let 150 plus years of experience inform a weary, cynical, yet occasionally humorous perspective. You could recall the peculiar happenings at the funerals you've hosted. You could invent some quirky guests, or on a darker note, some unscrupulous visitors, like grave robbers. You could tell how you've watched an infant nation develop and mature. You could touch on social issues like the Civil War, or past epidemics like the Spanish flu outbreak of the late 1910s. You could talk about being overfed, or use some other brand of morbidly creative language. You could make the reader as uneasy or as comforted as you wanted. Right from the perspective of a tree, you're planted by a happy-go-lucky child in the backyard of their house. You grow with them, and they hang a rope swing on your arm to play. You watch as they start high school, and their infectious energy slowly fades. They cry alone, under you, the victim of bullying. Then one day, they endeavor to end the pain by putting the rope swing to a different use, but just in the nick of time, you fracture and break, dropping them to the ground. You're horribly injured, but you find solace in sacrificing your wholeness for theirs. Right from the perspective of a leaf, right from the perspective of the sky. I'm far from the first to talk about this one, but for all who spearheaded the charge, I second that motion. Number 3. Write a story that subverts the royals evil, rebels good trope. It helps that the core of one of my older story ideas was literally this. A young, timid boy finds out he's heir to the throne of a distant land, but upon assuming power he's faced with not only the scars left by his tyrant father's rule, but a vicious monster created by that rule, the leader of the rebellion. The rebels are no longer losing at this point in the war, and with the royals reduced to a ragtag band of underdogs, it's basically the kid and his eccentric palace staff against a cowtree of highly trained bloodthirsty assassins. Not to mention the rebel leader is a charismatic master manipulator with half the country in his pocket. Several rewrites in, parts of this story are literally structured like a horror movie, namely inspired by the scene in Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining where Danny runs from Jack. I took the energy I felt from that scene and kind of ran with it. Underdog child king versus tyrannical rebel leader. Wanna guess who's Danny and who's Jack?
No matter where I go, with Susie, May, or Anna, I want the world to know I must have my banana.
All sadistic serial killers may be psychopaths, but not all psychopaths are sadistic serial killers. This should go without saying, though too often the resident psychopath of your story will have a staggering body count, an unquenchable thirst for blood, and sometimes even an alter ego. An underexplored concept, then, would be to tell a story from the perspective of a more mundane, more realistic psychopath. The draw would come from just how unconventional and unsettling some of their inner reactions would be. Their complicated relationship with emotions could be explored. Growing up, they could learn to supplement their lack of emotional empathy with cognitive empathy, its more clinical counterpart. They could test the waters on various things, to honest, realistic results. They could be high-masking on the outside, but we'd be seeing them from the inside. On the outside, there would be this offbeat slice-of-life story happening around them, with silly friends and zany hijinks. The narration could serve as a jarring counterpoint, and could even be used to add some dark humor. Get the juxtaposition just right, and you might have something pretty special on your hands. For anyone unfamiliar with this term, arrested development basically means a failure to mature and function at the expected rate. People with arrested development often think and act in very immature, underdeveloped ways. They tend to exhibit hyperdependence. They tend to withdraw from social interaction and sometimes even society at large, because the pressure to keep up in a world that doesn't understand or accommodate them is just too exhausting. This can be a symptom of a disability, childhood trauma, a toxic family environment, the list goes on. In simplest terms, they're stunted, locked inside this vicious cycle as their peers hit milestone after milestone, and they're left even further behind. In modern culture, you see signs of this everywhere. The shut-in epidemic in America, the hikikomori epidemic in Japan. Where you don't often see this, however, is in literature. There's just not a lot of books out there with nuanced, developmentally stunted characters, let alone protagonists. This may be in part because of the difficulty to add nuance to such a misunderstood and stigmatized problem. A lot of writers have never struggled with arrested development themselves, and they don't consciously know anyone who has. It's not something most people think or talk about all that much. You'll see the occasional article floating around at best, but in terms of fiction, this issue is pretty underrepresented. You could write about this topic in any number of ways, someone living with a disability, or something more sinister, like the toxic coddling of a parent. I'd also prefer to see a later-in-life view of this. Most hypothetical books about this topic would likely cater to teenagers and 20-somethings, thus their protagonists would likely be teenagers or 20-somethings, but I'd personally like to see a character in their 30s, 40s, 50s, the age where severe dependence on parents and siblings really starts hamstringing you. The 80-50 problem could be explored. For anyone unfamiliar with this term, the 80-50 problem refers to a result of the hikikomori epidemic in Japan. Hikikomori are a growing subset of teenagers and adults who refuse to enter the workforce and instead shut themselves away, often in the homes of their parents or relatives. But as the parents of these individuals age, there exists a growing concern. What happens when they're no longer able, or around, to support their adult children? The phenomenon is old enough now that the first-gen hikikomoris are approaching midlife, and this casts a pretty bleak shadow in the future. Not only will it spell economic detriment, but more importantly, a lot of underprepared individuals are going to be forced into some very precarious situations. If provisions aren't made, suicides will likely spike, and homelessness will spike as well. This isn't an isolated problem either. The same could be said for America, and probably lots of other places. We just don't have a name for it yet. And in case anyone is wondering why I have such a vested interest in seeing more representation of this, I'm autistic, and maturing has been a very slow, fairly agonizing process for me. Not to imply that I've arrived, without disclosing too many details, I certainly haven't, but I digress. I'm always scrolling forums, dragging the depths of the internet, trying to find someone I can relate to, someone who's gone before me and dealt with the kind of stuff I'm dealing with and made it out the other end okay, or, at the very least, someone who understands. The results have been mixed. The most unsettling discovery still stands out, even to this day. Some years ago, while assumably searching, I ran across this post. I think it was on Reddit, and the OP was in their 50s. They didn't really know what to do, and they were asking for any help they could get. They explained how their life was essentially just watching SpongeBob. All day, every day. They told how they still needed their mother to dress them. You can tell this left a mark on me by how much I remember, and sure, it might have been a troll, but I got to thinking after that. I thought a lot. And there may have been one or two serious replies, but the rest were smart aleck retorts at best and insults at worst. One lady's rather snarky comment basically amounted to, "You need help." "I know I need help. That's why I'm here." It was a haunting discrepancy. Nobody knew how to react to people like this. People like this were invisible until they weren't. And at the first hint of public exposure, they get mocked back into hiding. Is it any wonder they withdraw? I started picking up on these little discrepancies in my day-to-day, and I started gravitating to the motif of the adult child. Around that time, maybe a little later, I got into Melanie Martinez. And I know the character she plays is supposed to be an actual child, but a thought kept rearing its head in the back of my mind. It said, what if you took everything here at face value? What if everything was exactly as you saw it? Pretty disturbing, right? A grown woman forced into a high chair by some oppressive presence. Now that I'm older and hopefully wiser, I have even more feelings about that motif. Vague, morbidly curious fixations on maturity as it applies to everyone. Everyone in my generation. Old folks say we've been the slowest generation to grow up, and the more comfort abundance facilitates for us, the slower future generations will grow up as well. I can't even say how good or bad of a thing that is. It's just true. All I know, we need some fictional characters who reflect this stuff. This strange, unprecedented moment in history, who mirror a struggle that's only going to get more socially prevalent from here. We need some comrades on the page, fighting alongside us, living parallel to our collective experience. Exaggerate. Give us the ugly, the uglier, the ugliest. Shine a spotlight. Give us catharsis. And, if you dare to, give us some hope.